Shout out to G-Man Boxing.
Alright people, following on from his win over Canelo Alvarez, Dmitry Bivol, Canelo was said that he's going to invoke the rematch clause, so it's likely we're going to get to see Bivol versus Canelo 2. Alright, that seems likely at this stage. That's what we're going to see next. But I think we need to have a chat about Dmitry Bivol because he's really skyrocketed himself into the big leagues in boxing. You know, tremendous fighter, tremendously talented fighter, you know, very good fundamentals. We all knew that going into the Canelo fight. But as I said several times, he didn't have the name value. You know, talking about Dmitry Bivol going into the Canelo fight, a lot of people were saying it's easy for Canelo. I mean, who the hell? I've never heard of this guy he's fighting. So a lot of people didn't know who he was. And maybe they don't fully understand his resume and some of the cards he's fought on and some of the fights he's had. So I figured, it's weird because I was going to call this video Dmitry Bivol, is he a made man? But I didn't really think that worked. And I think, why don't we just do the tried and tested? People, what the fuck is the deal with Dmitry Bivol? So Dmitry Bivol, before we get into his pro career, because as a pro, Dmitry Bivol is 20-0. Alright, there's a lot to talk about in that 20-0. Some good names, obviously Canelo being the pick of them. But Dmitry Bivol was an experienced amateur. You know, he had... So here's the thing, right? BoxRec officially have him down as having 101 amateur fights. Alright? In reality, his amateur record is a lot bigger than that. BoxRec officially, I think he's 90-11 on BoxRec. But realistically, his amateur record is 268-15. So if my maths is correct, that's 283 amateur fights. That's a lot, people. He's won several titles in boxing. He won the 2008 World Youth Championships in Guadalajara, Mexico. That was at middleweight. He obviously was the Russian national champion in 2010. Defeated a lot of these guys names don't recognize. More really when we get into the kind of the national end of things, you know, the kind of European end on things, that I start seeing names I recognise. He did actually win the 2013 World Combat Games. That was in St. Petersburg at light heavyweight. He actually beat, funny enough, now some people may not recognise this name, but he beat a fighter called Jake Ball is this guy's name. Now if that name rings a bell, and that was in 2013, he beat him on points. If that name rings a bell, Jake Ball was a matchroom fighter. I think he's retired now. I don't think he's fought in a few years. But Eddie Hearn was kind of... I remember Eddie Hearn when he turned over in some of the post-fight interviews. And he was only kind of fighting just low down the card. But I remember Eddie Hearn had a bit of a had a twinkle in his eye when he was around Jake Ball. Because he was a big, lanky southpaw, about 6'4", 6'4", but in around the 6'4", 6'4.5" region. Southpaw at light heavyweight. He could punch a bit. He had one massive flaw. The guy had... Look, I've been watching boxing religiously for over a decade, but been watching boxing probably since the mid-2000s, you know, I was a casual back then. But Jake Ball has got to have, seriously, one of the worst chins I've ever seen in the sport. I mean, this guy's chin is horrendous. He only has 2 losses. But it's the nature of how he was knocked out. The first knockout loss, this shouldn't be, this is the Dmitry Bivol review, but he was knocked out badly by a guy called JJ McDonough, not a noted puncher, and Craig Richards, who can bang a bit, but Richards was hitting him with little cuffing. Well, you could tell these weren't even powerful shots, and he was acting like he was being hit by Deontay Wilder. So he beat him. He lost in the 2013 Summer Universal Games. He actually lost to Vodcek. Yeah, it was Vodcek, actually. I have to double check that there. And some of the other names on his resume, let's see, as an amateur. Beat Callum Smith. Obviously, that was talked about quite, you know, a lot when Callum Smith was, you know, was WBA champion at super middleweight, because they were talking about potentially doing that fight, Callum Smith versus Bivol. Callum Smith looking for revenge. Bivol was saying he'd be willing to go down in weight. Look at this record. Like, there's so many amateur fights this guy had. So, as is often the case, Now here's something you got to take into consideration when it comes to not necessarily just Russian boxing, Eastern European in general. They really do take a lot. They really do work on the amateur system. You know, a lot of these guys, what they do in the amateurs, to some, not all, but to some is more important than what they do in the pro games. The amateur system is, they take that very serious in Eastern Europe. But unlike the UK and in Ireland, really bad in Ireland for doing this, they really teach you in this part of Europe a real amateurish style. It's about just get in, pick a few shots, no power in them, you're not rotating your hips, and you get out of dodge. They teach you how to pick up points. European style, it's a lot more kind of suited to the pros. They do stand a bit more upright. You see Dmitry Bivol uses quite a wide stance. But one thing they do teach in Eastern Europe, and I credit them for doing this because I wish they do it in the UK and Ireland more, is they really encourage power punching. They don't tend to do that. Many amateur gyms I was around, if you're trying to hit the bag really, really hard, like if you're trying to focus on power punch, a lot of coaches will say, don't be doing that, don't do it, not in my amateur gym, not in my gym. You got to work on get as many shots in and getting out. They really deter you from trying to hit hard, and they really set you up in the Eastern European, you know, gyms in the amateur system, same bit like Cuba. They really set you up for the pro game, and they really do. So a lot of these guys, they have an extraordinary amount of amateur fights. You know, Dmitry Bivol nearly 300. They're well schooled in the amateurs, so when they're turning over into the pro games, if they're anyway decent as an amateur, a lot of times they tend to kind of move up the ladder quite quickly. But Dmitry Bivol made his pro debut Friday the 28th of November, and this was, well, he turned pro with World of Boxing. Okay, now I'm not sure who's World of Boxing. I'm not sure who the main promoter is. I know the head of World of Boxing is a guy called Ryabinsky. He's a billionaire from Russia. He was promoting obviously Povetkin. I think he is the main guy with it. It's just when you look at World of Boxing on BoxRec, there's often different names listed as the promoter. So I wonder, is it one of them gigs that like Ryabinsky is officially the guy, but bit like Al Heyman, you know, he's officially the guy, but they have like Tom Brown. At one stage they had Lou DiBella. I wonder if they do something like that. But he was on a couple of undercards of guys whose names you probably recognise. So Dmitry Bivol, as I said, made his pro debut. He was the first fight on that card. He fought a guy called Jorge Rodriguez Oliva, who was 25-10. Took care of him in 6 rounds. Now, that guy had been stopped prior to that, but interestingly enough, listen to some of the names who were on this undercard. He made his debut on the same card as Sergey Kuzmin. We all know who that is. And Sergey Kuzmin and Dmitry Bivol shared a lot of cards. He also had Sergey Lipinets, who was 4-0 at the time. Rakim Shakayev, who was a very fun cruiserweight, who had absolutely no stamina, but he looked like a Viking. You had Dmitry Kudryashov at the time. He was being built as the kind of next Sergey Kovalev, the cruiserweight Kovalev. Troyanovsky, he had a lot going for him at the time. He was undefeated, and obviously Provodnikov was main eventing. So not a bad little card to get on. And a lot of them cards out in Russia, certainly when Ryabinsky was putting them shows on, they had some stacked undercards. It was his 4th pro fight that he had his first fight in the States, and this was him top of the bill. He fought a guy called Felipe Romero, who was 9-8. Stopped him in 8 rounds. It was a clean KO. Obviously on this card you also had Sergey Kuzmin. You had King Tug, because I just cannot pronounce his last name, but you know who I'm talking about. Even in his second pro fight, he fought a guy called, his third pro fight, called a guy called Joey Vegas. Again, these guys, their records were not anything to write home about. It had to be said. You know, Joey Vegas was 17-10. But who was main eventing this card? Well, it was actually on the undercard of Alexander Povetkin versus Mike Perez. You had Gregory Droz defending his WBC Cruiserweight title. He disappeared off the face of the earth. If anyone remembers Gregory Droz, the pretty boy they called him, he literally disappeared off the face of the earth. I think he had an injury. Also had Shakayev, had Char versus Leopai, Alex Leopai. You fight Leopai. They had him. They also had Kudryashov again. You see the way some of these cards are being put on, and they are getting some names on them. So his next fight after Felipe Romero, this was the first time I ever actually saw Dmitry Bivol live in the flesh. and he was fighting a guy who went by the name of Jackson Dos Santos. Now, Dos Santos had been stopped several times prior to this, but Dmitry Bivol put an absolute beating on him. Had him down in the second, finished him off in the fourth round. And once again, this was in Moscow. Actually, it wasn't in Moscow. It was in Kazan, Russia, which I think is more... I think that's more inland. Like, it would probably be... Well, it would definitely probably be more in the Asian part, but it wouldn't be in the Far East. It would be kind of near Ekaterinburg, I think is kind of roughly where that is. But that was also on the undercard of... Well, I think... Correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't Lebedev the main event? Because Lebedev was actually defending his title against Latif Coyote. That was a mismatch. Povetkin fought Whack. This was a great card, actually. This card, right, I think it's still available. If it's not available on YouTube, you can still get it on Daily Motion. This was a Box Nation card. It was on a Wednesday. And this was probably the best card of 2015. I remember watching this whole card. There was Rakim Shakayev against Ola Afolabi. Great fight. Shakayev started like a man possessed and got knocked out because he ran out of steam. You could Kudryashov versus Cesar Renan Kukuna, who was 48-0, had only like one knockout in those 48 wins, couldn't punch at all. The Argentinian guy just fought bums in Argentina. Then you had Kudryashov getting stopped by Ola Duradola. That was back when Ola Duradola was useful, and he only had 2 losses at the time. And that was a good fight. That was a good little shootout. That was a shootout, that fight. Povetkin beating the crap out of Whack and stopping him late. That was due to an eye injury. I think it was a bad cut over Whack's eye. And Lebedev beating the crap out of Coyote. So, you know, just... I look back at some of these cards and I just think, God, we don't get cards like that anymore. So Bivol's next fight, he was co-main eventing against Clinton Conceição. 21-8. This was another good fight. This was another good win. It was another good knockout. Conceição had been stopped before. Sergei Kuzmin was actually main eventing on this one, and this was in the States. He beat Rodney Hernandez, on points. So they're kind of getting Bivol in between America and in between Russia. It's around about this time where Russian boxing kind of started to kind of slow down a bit, because at the time you obviously had Povetkin, who was going on his tear. You had Lebedev, who was he was the guy in the cruiserweight division at that time, because Usyk hadn't even won a world title yet. By the end of that year, Usyk was champion, and he would have beat the living crap out of Denis Lebedev if they had a fought. But at the time, Lebedev was seen as the man in the division at that time. And his next fight would actually be on the 21st of May, 2016. If any of you will remember, this happened in Russia, in Moscow. This was meant to be, because the card still went ahead, but the main event was meant to be Povetkin versus Wilder, for those who don't remember. Povetkin tested positive for it wasn't Clenbuterol, it was meldonium. It was meldonium he tested positive for. And Dmitry Bivol, he fought quite high up the card. He fought an undefeated guy, Felix Valois. Now, he did have Felix Valois down in two rounds. He had him down in the 6th and in the 8th, early in both rounds, but wasn't able to close the show. But Dmitry Bivol, again, at this stage, and this guy, Felix Valois, a very tough man, never been stopped. Been in there with guys like Maxim Vlasov, Shabransky. For all his flaws, he can bang a bit. Sullivan Barrera, again, very big, strong, physical, light heavyweight. Certainly back then he was. And obviously this was on the undercard. Obviously you had Denis Lebedev versus Victor Emilio Ramirez, who got a gift decision over... What was his name? I can't remember his name. The upsetter. What was his name? He was British. Ovil McKenzie got a gift decision in Argentina against him, and he got battered by Lebedev in 2 rounds. McKenzie would have done a better job. Like, he probably would have lost, but he would have done at least a better job than that. And it's around about this time HBO actually took up Dmitry Bivol. I remember this. Was it this fight? It was, wasn't it? He got a 4th round knockout, and I'm pretty sure it was on a HBO card. It wasn't this one. He fought a guy at the start of 2017 in Russia called Robert Burridge. Now, he dropped him a bunch of times in that fight. This is for the WBA interim light heavyweight world title. Alright, because at the time, obviously, Dmitry Bivol was gaining. He actually won that title, funny enough. He won the interim title against Felix Valois. Now, at that time, the WBA champion was Sergey Kovalev at light heavyweight. So Kovalev was going into a fight with Andre Ward at the time. In fact, actually, Kovalev wouldn't have had defended his title against Chilemba. He would have been getting ready for that title defense. And obviously, he was going to fight Ward. He lost to Ward, invoked the rematch clause. So Bivol was just going around defending his WBA interim title. He had another fight against Samuel Clarkson, who was 19-3. So again, like, he's steadily increasing the competition as it goes on. There's no, like, obviously these guys are not good. They're not world beaters. But, you know, during some of these career reviews, we've seen guys where it's just been like, you know, what the hell? Where did they dig you up from? You know, those type of guys. It's not really like that. I mean, the worst kind of record I see here is an 8-5 record, who's now 10-14, and he won that on points. So Dmitry Bivol is doing what he's doing. He had a 10-rounder. Now, this was the first time I ever saw Dmitry Bivol on HBO, because I knew I seen him on HBO before, and it was on June 17, 2017. He'd been pro for just coming up to 3 years now at this stage, and this was a 4th-round knockout over Cedric Agnew, and I thought Bivol looked $1 million in this fight. This was his 11th pro fight. It was on the undercard of Andre Ward versus Kovalev 2. I remember HBO were actually quite impressed, and it was no sooner than that Andre Ward retired, because remember, he retired not long after the fight. Dmitry Bivol was mandatory for Andre Ward. And then in Monaco in 2017, I remember this fight very well, Eddie Hearn with those Monaco shows, it wasn't even the fact that it was Matchroom. Like, he had the guys like Lebedev headlining. It was kind of a case of, I'll put my Matchroom fighters on it, but I'll also get kind of any name I can get. And he put Bivol versus Trent Broadhurst on. Trent Broadhurst, I believe he was Aussie, or he is Aussie. Yeah, he is. And, you know, he went into that fight 20-1. All right, he'd only, although the one loss was a KO loss, people thought, okay, this might go a few rounds. You know, he'd actually been beaten, scarily enough, by one of the guys, Robert Birdridge, who Dmitry Bivol already beaten. But Bivol went in. You'll see that fight, very famous. End of the first round, literally the last second. Bivol lands a big right hand, knocks Broadhurst damn near out cold. WBA light heavyweight champion. Thank you very much. I'll take that title. I'll go on HBO. I'll go and defend this title on the undercard of Sergey Kovalev versus Igor Mikhalkin against Sullivan Barrera. I think at the time they were trying to get Kovalev versus Bivol over the line. Obviously, Kovalev had just won back the light heavyweight world title from Shabransky, because obviously Andre Ward had retired, vacated those titles, so Kovalev was in a good position to get one. And they were looking to do a unification. So Kovalev fought in the main event, beat the crap out of Shabransky on the undercard. Dmitry Bivol broke Sullivan Barrera down and stopped him in the 12th round. Sullivan Barrera, at the time, only had one loss, and that was to Andre Ward. And Andre Ward, he beat Barrera handily, but he had a few rough moments in there. I think it was because Barrera, shocked Ward in terms of the size, because Barrera is a unit at light heavyweight. The lad's a freaking cruiserweight at light heavyweight. He's huge. But Bivol was able to put him down, was able to win that fight on points. His next fight then would be against Isaac Chilemba, and again they were looking to build this into Kovalev versus Bivol. I remember that well at the time. On that card, Kovalev was main eventing against Eleider Alvarez. Dmitry Bivol fought Isaac Chilemba. He won that fight as clear as day. It wasn't the most entertaining fight. He boxed Isaac Chilemba's head off. Isaac Chilemba, a very hard man to stop. He's only been stopped once in his career, and that was against Vodcek, and that was an injury. I believe he injured his hand in that fight, if memory serves me right. And Bivol just did what he needed to do. Won every round. George Hill scored at 116, 112. Don't know how he found that to give to Bivol. But on the main event was obviously Sergey Kovalev. What happened to Kovalev? Well, he got knocked out in 7 rounds by Eleider Alvarez. So that whole plan of Bivol versus Kovalev, knocked that on the head, because obviously Kovalev's head got knocked off. So Bivol had to go elsewhere, basically, and he did. He stayed with main events. I don't know. He wasn't promoted by Katy Duva at the time, and Katy Duva she's kind of faded into the wilderness. Really, I mean, she's not done anything the last few years. Or if she has, it's very little. But he was going to main event his own show. He was going to fight Jean Pascal. And I remember at the time, I was just thinking, oh, for the love of God. Jean Pascal retired after he fought Sergei Kovalev in 2016. And he looked terrible at that fight. Well, he got beaten soundly by Bivol, on points. He wasn't dropped or anything like that. And I was kind of like, that's not a good look, because Kovalev beat the living crap out of Jean Pascal first time around, but really bad in the second fight. He'd retired. So I kind of thought, okay, that's not good, the fact that he's going the distance with Jean Pascal and, giving up a couple of rounds. But Pascal obviously got an Indian summer in his career before he ended up getting popped. Kuzman fought on this undercard. I can't pronounce this guy's last name. Akhmadaliev. I always struggle to get the name out, but Akhmadaliev and Madrimov both fought on that card. Israel Madrimov is a tremendous talent. So too did Teshenko. You wonder where all these fighters have gone. Being with Katia Duva at one stage, not being with her, but probably just having a few of these fighters on the books would have been a good look for the long run. Well, his next fight then, Joe Smith Jr. At this stage now, Dmitry Bivol committed his future to the Zone, signed with Eddie Hearn, because the Zone had only started just at the back end of 2018. This was obviously March 2019. And on this undercard, you also had Callum Johnson. I think that was a fight that they were maybe looking to potentially put on at some stage down the line. Kuzman, Madrimov also on the undercard. Nikita Ababe, who bizarrely is still undefeated. I don't rate him highly at all. I'm just a little interject there. But Bivol fought Joe Smith Jr., beat Joe Smith Jr. soundly, had a few rocky moments. Joe Smith Jr. basically says, see, at this stage, people were kind of saying that Bivol, he's not really a no-hit puncher. But Joe Smith Jr., although he's improved dramatically, and I think Joe Smith Jr. took the lessons he got off Dmitry Bivol in that fight and was able to pay them forward in his own career. But he was hurt by Dmitry Bivol. He was buzzed early on in the fight. I think it was the second or third round. And he really was put in his place from then on in. Now, he did buzz Dmitry Bivol at the end of one of the rounds. I can't remember off the top of my head which round it was. It was late enough in the fight. It might have been the 9th or 10th round. And Bivol was buzzed a bit, but it was very, very end of the round. I don't think Bivol heard the bell completely. He beat Joe Smith Jr. soundly, beat him on points. Smith Jr. was put in his place, and Bivol just did what he needed to do. Let his boxing do the talking. Then he fought Lenin Castillo. This was in October, and this was on the undercard of Alexander Usyk versus Chaz Witherspoon. Obviously, Usyk's debut at heavyweight was in Chicago, Illinois. And at this stage now, he'd been basing himself out of Chicago, just solely, or not Chicago, sorry, out of America. If you take pretty much after he fought, I think it was at this guy Cedric Andrew, not even that. I think it was after, pretty much after 2016. And I think the start of 2017, he'd not fought in Russia. He's not fought in Russia since, actually. But he fought Lenin Castillo. Lenin Castillo, never been stopped, only recently been stopped by Callum Smith brutally. And Dmitry Bivol, again, just completely nullified Castillo. He wasn't winning he wasn't getting you up out of your seat in these fights, if you know what I mean. He wasn't the most entertaining. I'm not reporting on dramatic, big, one-punch knockouts, apart from the Broadhurst fight. But he was showing his skill, he was showing his jab, he was showing his speed, he was showing his judge distance, he was showing his range, he was showing all the things that you look for in a good, fundamentally sound boxer. And you knew he had gears there. You knew this wasn't Bivol hitting his ceiling. Obviously, he wouldn't fight again until 2021. Nearly 2 years later, he went in there against Craig Richards in a fight in which, no disrespect to Craig Richards, but I believe that he really, between the ring rust and everything, he never really got going. But even not getting going was enough to beat Craig Richards. Richards had moments of success in the fight, as these scorecards, 113, 115, and 115, 114, bizarre. The 118, 110 scorecard is a lot more precise, definitely. I mean, I just don't know how he scored that. I really don't. I don't know how he managed to find out rounds to give to him, like that many rounds anyway. So there was that. Obviously, the next fight would be actually in Russia. Apologies, I actually forgot. Actually, this was in Russia. I completely forgot about this. Was in December, just gone. And this was his return to Russia, first time in nearly 5 years, he fought a guy called Umar Salamov. And the Salamov never been stopped, the fellow Russian. His only loss, who was his only loss to? Damien Hooper, who was 19-1, an Aussie who got beat by Renald Quinlan. I remember that fight actually, the Renald Quinlan loss. It's not a good look when you're losing to him. And you beat a guy like Umar Salamov, who's, he's not a world beater, but he's not that bad. And you're going to lose to Renald Quinlan. Or no, actually, sorry, he beat Renald Quinlan. Apologies, I read that completely wrong. He beat Renald Quinlan in his next fight. I was looking at that thinking, you're losing to Renald Quinlan? That's not a good look, mate. But Dmitry Bivol, that was only, 6 months removed from the Craig Richards fight. He looked like his old self. You really saw a lot of talent in there. You saw that he was able to control the distance, he was able to control the range, he was able to do what he wanted to do, pick his opponent off, and he won that fight clearly. I heard Eddie Hearn say that based on your last 2 performances, we didn't see a performance like this coming. Because, based on those 2 performances, he was put in there against Canelo Alvarez. Saul Canelo Alvarez, pound for pound, many people's eyes, the best fighter in the world. #1 pound for pound. Bivol had been, what would be the word you'd use? There is an analogy for it, but while everyone else is making noise, while everyone else is showing this and saying this, Bivol had just been silently going about his business, doing what he needs to do, not making any noise, not really doing anything, but ultimately he was about to make a lot of noise in this fight. He was taken as the opponent. He was treated horribly by everyone at that card. That's another story. But he went in there with Alvarez and he showed how good he really is. Tremendous catch and counter, tremendous body puncher, or tremendous he was going to the body, but tremendous combination puncher because he was lighting Canelo up at times with combinations. Tremendous long range fighter, fast hands, fast feet, good defense, tremendous stamina. He pretty much showed everything in this fight. It bemused Alvarez. He completely shut Alvarez down. Yes, the scorecards were absurdly close, but Alvarez took the L. Bivol got the marquee win of his career, and it looks ever the more likely that he is going to end up facing Canelo Alvarez in a rematch. Now, Dmitry Bivol, to be in there with Alvarez, you're pretty much guaranteed a good payday. To beat Alvarez, not only have you proved that you are a tremendously talented fighter, but you've also elevated yourself. Canelo can say all he wants, he's the A side, he's this, that. Bivol beat him. Bivol was the champion. Now, this always happens in Canelo fights, but Bivol had to go to the ring first when he's the champion. It was Canelo Bivol. It'll be Bivol Canelo next time. And I believe Bivol will win. At the end of the day, there's a lot to look at Dmitry Bivol and there's a lot to admire. You are dealing with a tremendously talented fighter. A guy who has good power, good fundamentals, good judge of distance, good movement, good hand speed, good foot speed. But also he's got a tremendously strong mind. You can tell that Bivol is the sort of guy where if you gave him 1 round and he needed to save the world and he needed to win it, he'd just go out there and do his own thing. He wouldn't even think 2 notions of it. I saw it after Dmitry Bivol in the lead up to this fight. He just had a stoic mindset. I won't be denied. I'm going in. Nothing's gonna. And believe you me, there was a lot of things that could have got Dmitry Bivol riled up. The anthems for one. That was just that really got me, that one. But Bivol just said, no, I'm gonna go about my business. I'm gonna box, and I'm gonna let my boxing do the talking. And I found that tremendously impressive. Tremendously impressive. So that is Dmitry Bivol's career in a nutshell. As I said, he is likely going to fight Canelo in a rematch next. I believe he will win that. I hope that he's already survived 1 decision. I hope to God we don't have a really bad decision go against him. That would be horrible. It really would. Especially if it's a fight like I think it'll be, where it's very similar to this fight. Maybe Alvarez be a bit busier, but ultimately it'd be the exact same, I believe. Because how do we not know Bivol? Bit like Usyk against Joshua. How do we not know that Bivol hasn't got more gears to go through. How do we know that was Bivol in 5th gear? Well, we don't. I will leave it there. I hope you found this enjoyable. Like that, there's not as many knockouts in Bivol's resume. We're not really, you know, when you got a fight with loads of knockouts, it's always good to know. You know, you'd be like, oh, he went flying this round and he went flying that round. Bivol, it's more stoic boxing. But there's a lot of... I wonder if anyone's going to go back and look at some of the old fights, because they're on cards that are not lost in time. At least most of them aren't. And they're on... He was making a name for himself in Russia before he went over to the States. Fighting on the Lebedev's cards, fighting on Povetkin's cards, and ultimately getting himself elevated to a position he's in now. So, credit to him. Tremendous fighter, tremendous talent, and we'll see how he goes from here on in. I will leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Smash the like button if you could. Help your boy get to the old 8k mark. We're just a little over 500 away from 8k. Not doing too bad, huh? Not doing too bad. I'll leave it then, people. Hope you enjoyed it. Peace.